Cupid Hates Me. A Sweet Rom-Com Short. By Mazy Morris. This is an AI-narrated audio story. You can find a link to get the ebook version in the description box below. Valentine's Day 2018. "I think Cupid hates me," said Claire as she stared dejectedly at the abandoned pointy end of her sugar cone, which was all that was left of her small serving of fat-free soy vanilla ice cream. Claire had exercised self-discipline. Lila, on the other hand, had announced at the beginning of the evening that she intended to sample every item on the Hungry Bunny old-fashioned soda fountain's extensive menu and didn't intend to go home until she tried every last thing on offer. Lila eats when she's depressed, and there's nothing more depressing than being single on Valentine's Day. "Of course, Cupid doesn't hate you," I said. "Cupid doesn't hate anyone. He's the god of love." "I thought that was Venus or Aphrodite or somebody," Lila said. "Cupid is the son of Venus." Occasionally, my liberal arts major came in handy. Not too often, though. That's how I ended up working retail. "Are you sure Cupid was the son of Venus?" Lila didn't look convinced. "Ami's usually right. Claire always sticks up for me, and she was correct. I am usually right, at least about things like how Greek gods are related to each other. I have an astonishing command of a plethora of entirely useless random factoids." Cupid was also known as Eros. It wasn't until the Hellenistic period that he was portrayed as a chubby child. Lila and Claire just stared at me. "It was also during this period that he acquired a bow and arrow," I added, just because I couldn't help myself. "It's a sickness. It really is." "Right," said Lila. "Bow and arrows. The better to pierce you through the heart and leave you in despair." Lila tends to be a bit gloomy when she's suffering from unrequited love. The latest unresponsive object of her affection was her landlord, who lived 2 floors below her. In my opinion, though, it was not the indifferent landlord who was getting her down, it was that she still hadn't gotten over Bradley, her ex-husband. They'd been divorced for 3 years, but she still talked about him all the time. All of Lila's friends liked Bradley, including me. Bradley was the best thing that ever happened to Lila, and I say that knowing a lot more than I should about why they broke up. Bradley and I kept in touch. I think he kept in touch mostly because he'd never really gotten over Lila either. He trusted me to keep an eye on her, even though he couldn't look after her himself anymore. Lila needs a lot of looking after. "Didn't Cupid shoot himself with his own arrow or something?" Claire asked. "He did. Cupid and Psyche. Tragic story. Aren't they all?" Lila held up her empty banana split dish. "We need more ice cream." I was the gopher for the evening. I'd volunteered. That way, I could make sure Lila paced herself and didn't end up getting sick on the ride home. Not that that had ever happened, of course. I don't have the ruined shoes to prove it. I headed for the soda fountain counter. We'd picked the Hungry Bunny solely on its merit of being utterly unromantic. It was one of those places where 4 different jukeboxes playing 4 different songs at the same time blare at you from all 4 corners. Despite what you might expect, there are no cozy booths at the Hungry Bunny, just tall chrome stools bolted to the floor and bright fluorescent lighting overhead. The Hungry Bunny caters to 2 major types of clientele, the over 60s and families with hordes of hungry kids. It's not the kind of place where one has to worry about being subjected to lovey-dovey couples and conspicuous public displays of affection, which was precisely what Claire, Lila and I were going for. "A cherry chocolate shake," I said to the soda jerk. "You ladies drowning your sorrows or something?" he asked. He had an awfully nice smile. I liked the way his eyes crinkled up at the corners. He had a sprinkling of freckles across his nose, and his ears seemed to be perpetually pink. It's a bad sign when I start noticing freckles and perpetually pink ears. It means I'm interested. For me, being interested is rarely reciprocal. I wondered what cute soda jerk's name was. I'd never seen him before, not that I should be expected to. I'm not a regular at the Hungry Bunny. I think it had been at least 6 months since the last time I'd been inside, and that was just to wait until Claire brought my spare key after I'd locked myself out of my apartment 3 blocks over. I'm Logan, the soda jerk said as if he could read the question in my mind. Nice to meet you, I said. Two of us are just suffering from a temporary case of Valentine's Day blues. Only one of us is drowning her sorrows. Miss Cherry Chocolate? Yes. Extra small again? Yes. What's your name? Ami. Just then, a man sat down at the opposite end of the bar. Compared to him, Lila looked positively radiant with happiness. Logan seemed to know the man. He left me and poured Mr. Sad Sack a cup of coffee. Sorry about that, Logan said when he returned. He's a regular. Mr. Sad Sack began to sob softly into his coffee. Happy guy, I said. Is he always like this? He's worse than usual this evening. I should send over my friend Lila. They say misery loves company. Logan looked over at my friends. Lila was getting a little restive and motioning for me to hurry up with the sweets. Is Lila Miss Cherry Chocolate? Yes. I think Miss Small Vanilla Cone is more his type. What makes you say that? Cup of Coffee has a thing for sweet-natured blondes. That's how he came to be so depressed. Claire is a blonde. She also personifies sweetness. I took Lila's cherry chocolate shake and headed back to the table. Lila took one look at her shake and declared it unacceptable. Where are the sprinkles? I thought it was supposed to come with sprinkles. I'll take it back, I said. Why don't you come with me, Claire? Why would I want to come with you? See that guy sitting at the counter? You mean the one who's crying? That's the one. What about him? Logan says he has a thing for blondes. I left out the sweet-natured part. That seemed unnecessarily personal. Who is Logan? Lila interrupted. The soda jerk. Oh, you're on a first-name basis with him already? Lila looked him over. He is pretty cute. You should definitely. I ignored Lila. What do you think of him? I asked Claire. He is cute, plus you'd have free ice cream for. I didn't mean the soda jerk. I meant Mr. Sad Sack there at the end of the counter. What do you think of him? You like sensitive men and, by the looks of him, he's about as sensitive as they come. I don't know. Claire looked doubtful. Go talk to him, I said. What do you have to lose? What does she have to lose? Lila interrupted. Your so-called Mr. Sad Sack is probably an unhinged obsessive type, and even if he isn't, even if he's practically perfect in every way, and they hit it off and fall madly in love and get married, it will still end badly. It always does. Aren't you a little ray of sunshine? I said. I'm taking this shake back myself, said Lila. I had my heart set on sprinkles. Never mind. Stay where you are. I'll get you your sprinkles. I hastily picked up Lila's glass, grabbed Claire's arm, and dragged her after me. Are you sure this is a good idea? Claire protested. Wouldn't I be intruding? Think of it as your random act of kindness for the day. I mean, look at the guy. There wasn't much to see but the back of his head, but he was wearing his hat at a despondent angle, and I can't stand to see anyone depressed without wanting to cheer them up. I don't know. Claire was still hesitant. We'd made it to the counter, and Claire stood around awkwardly, trying not to look in the direction of Mr. Sad Sack, who had started opening sugar packets in a distraught manner and then forgetting to pour them into his coffee. Apparently, I was supposed to ask for sprinkles, I said to Logan. Better add some. Logan looked from Claire to Mr. Sad Sack and back to Claire again. He raised one eyebrow at me. I winked and then thought better of it and ended up rubbing my eye like I'd gotten something in it. I smudged my mascara into a raccoon-like circle around my right eye. Unfortunately, I didn't realize it until half an hour later when I made a trip to the ladies' room. What's your name? Logan mouthed to Claire, but she was too busy watching Mr. Sad Sack open sugar packets to notice. Claire will have another small cone, I said, much too loudly. I really don't need any more ice cream, Claire protested. Lila was watching us. She was starting to look peeved. Our new mint mocha is delicious. You have to try it. Compliments of the house, Logan said. It'll be a couple of minutes, though. I'll have to bring up a new tub from the back. Why don't you have a seat while you wait? He smiled at me like we had some secret, which I guess we did, and inclined his head in the direction of Mr. Sad Sack. Claire hesitated and went and sat down near Mr. Sad Sack, but she left 2 empty stools between them. Logan handed me the newly sprinkled cherry chocolate shake, and I went back to rejoin Lila. What do you think you're doing? She demanded. What are you thinking, saddling a sweet girl like Claire with some deeply depressed weirdo? It was hard to argue that a man who went to an ice cream place for the sole purpose of crying into a cup of coffee wasn't depressed, so I just said he might not be as weird as he looked. They're always as weird as they look, said Lila. In fact, I always take a man's apparent weirdness factor and multiply it by 3 just to be on the safe side. Safe side of what? You know. I don't know. I prefer to lower my odds of ending up as a body buried under a beech tree in some crazy person's backyard. Specific thing to worry about, but it's hard to argue with the dubious logic of someone who's already consumed half their body weight in frozen dairy desserts, so I let it go. I've always suspected it's the aggressively unweird ones who are most likely to be homicidal, but what do I know? We sat there in silence for a few minutes watching Claire and Mr. Sad Sack glance at each other and then hastily look away. Every time I looked at Logan, he gave me a big grin. He just got cuter. I'd remind myself not to stare, and then 2 minutes later, I'd find myself watching him again. I looked down at my phone and saw I'd gotten a text from Aunt Linda. I have Lila's ex, Bradley, saved under a fake name in my phone. I don't really have any Aunt Linda, but Lila doesn't need to know that. I slipped my phone under the table to read Bradley's text. Bradley wanted to know if Lila was with me, where we were, what we were doing, and how long we'd be there. After I'd answered all that, he said he was coming, so not to let Lila go anywhere. Bradley was coming to the Hungry Bunny? That was pretty nervy, crashing your ex-wife's Valentine's Day all-girl pity party. Who was that? Lila asked. I couldn't tell her it was Bradley. Lila didn't like that we were still friends, although she'd never come right out and say so. I suspected she was jealous. She had no reason to be. I liked Bradley. I liked him a lot. But not that way. That was my Aunt Linda, I said. At this time of night? She's a night owl. Oh. She texts me for advice. About what? Curtains. Curtains? Yeah, she's getting all new curtains, Anne. You know you're a terrible liar, said Lila and slurped up the rest of her shake in one go. 20 minutes later, Bradley showed up. Claire was still at the counter with Mr. Sad Sack. There were no longer any empty stools between them, and he'd stopped crying. Claire is an excellent listener. Very sympathetic. She was probably exactly what Mr. Sad Sack needed. I wasn't too sure what Claire was going to get out of it. Probably nothing. She's a smart girl, though. Claire wouldn't give out her number to an unhinged person. She's a psych nurse, so she's very good at spotting unhinged. Of all my friends and acquaintances, Claire is the statistically least likely to become a body buried under a beech tree in some weirdo's backyard because she gave out her name to a random unhinged homicidal maniac. Bradley came in and went straight to the counter like he hadn't spotted Lila or me. He walked up to Claire and gave her a hug. He shook Mr. Sad Sack's hand. I decided Mr. Sad Sack must be making a hit with Claire if she was introducing him to people. Claire pointed over at us. Bradley looked genuinely surprised to see us. It's easy for Bradley to fake surprise. He's been a rising star in the movie industry since his first film came out. He's now on film 4. Lila's inability to come to terms with a series of breathless tabloid reports of Bradley's close association with his beautiful and even more famous co-star in said first film was a contributing factor in his and Lila's divorce. Bradley has insisted all along that there was nothing of a dubious nature going on between him and Miss Famous. I believed him. I think even Lila believed him too, deep down. Aunt Linda's curtains, my sweet patootie, said Lila. She glared at Bradley and then back at me. I just shrugged. Bradley started on his way over. I have to use the ladies' room, I said and beat a hasty retreat. When I came out of the ladies' room after fixing my raccoon eye, Bradley was sitting in my chair, talking to Lila. I couldn't be entirely sure from all the way across the room, but it looked like he was holding her hand. That was an interesting development. Not distressing, but completely unexpected. I sidled up to the counter. It was a lot more crowded than it had been earlier in the evening, and I found myself on the very outer edge, wedged in next to a family of 12, none of whom seemed able to make up their minds about what they wanted. I was next to the wall, overlooking the ice cream case, which meant that Logan came over in my direction pretty often. Not that I minded. It looks like the evening's turning out well for some people, Logan said. By some people, he meant Claire and Mr. Sad Sack, who were now sitting with their heads very close together. I hoped I hadn't steered Claire wrong. I didn't want my dearest friend ending up in Mr. Sad Sack's backyard buried under a beech tree. He's all right, isn't he? In the head, I mean. He's not criminally insane or anything? I asked. You mean cup of coffee? I nodded. I promise you that he's a great guy. I wondered how Logan could be so definite. Promising that a random regular was a great guy seemed like overconfidence on his part. How can you be so sure? He's my brother. I'd just taken a sip of seltzer and cranberry juice, I'd given up on ice cream before I made myself sick, and I spewed it all over the counter. Logan laughed. Surprised? Yes. I mean, why didn't you say something? You didn't ask. All right. I'll ask. Why is he so sad? His fiancée died. Car accident. Unexpectedly. A year ago today. They were going to meet here and then go on. He had this elaborate evening planned, but she never showed up. That was a good reason to be sad. In fact, I'd judge any man who didn't dissolve into a massive sadness on the first anniversary of a tragedy like that. I'm really sorry. I know. So am I. Logan had things to do, but he stood there for a minute and just looked at me. Thank you, he said. For what? For sending over your friend to cheer my brother up. It does seem to be working. It was a very kind thing to do. I appreciate it. We were about to have a moment, but it was interrupted by the harried matriarch of the 12 who had just issued an edict that it was small chocolate cones all around and that anyone who made a fuss could go without. I sat there through another seltzer and a cranberry juice before I decided to call it a night. Bradley and Lila were still deep in earnest conversation, and Claire was firmly attached to the stool next to Logan's brother. Regardless of how the evening had turned out for Lila and Claire, my presence wasn't going to be required, or welcome, most likely. It was a very unexpected ending to what had started as a girls' night out. While I was taking out money to pay our bill, Logan scribbled something on a napkin. He folded it in half and handed it to me. Read it after you get home. Okay. You'll be all right getting home on your own? I'll be fine. I only live 3 blocks from here. You're not planning on walking, are you? I had been planning on it, but he was probably right. It was late. It was cold and starting to snow. Still, it seemed like such a waste of money I didn't have to call an Uber for just 3 blocks. Wait a minute, Logan said. He walked down to the other end of the counter where Claire and Mr. Not So Sad Anymore were obviously lost in a world of their own. I took the opportunity to peek at the napkin note Logan had handed me. It said, "Have dinner with me tomorrow? Meet me here at 7 o'clock. I smiled and folded it back up. I already had plans for the following evening, but plans can be changed. James and Claire will walk you home, Logan said when he came back. They're having a good time. I don't want to mess that up. If they're having that great of a time, then walking you home isn't going to mess anything up. All right, I said. It was hard to argue with logic like that. I turned to walk away, but Logan called me back. What's your favorite song? I didn't have to think about that for too long. My favorite song is Forever Love by Kenny and the Cool Cats. Cheesy, I know. I try not to admit to it too often. It makes me sound like I'm about 75 and have questionable taste in music. You won't laugh if I tell you? I promise not to laugh. Forever Love. He just stood there with a blank look on his face. You know. Kenny and the Cool Cats. He was still drawing a blank. Never mind, I said. Come here. He motioned for me to lean in close. I thought he was going to whisper something in my ear. That wasn't what he had in mind. We both leaned over the counter and met somewhere in the middle, and he kissed me on the cheek. Right there in the middle of the crowded ice cream parlor while he was supposed to be working. It happened so fast that for several seconds afterward, I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. A Saturday in June. Claire looked beautiful in her wedding dress. Of course, Claire would look beautiful if you swathed her in toilet paper and stuck a plunger in her hand. I don't look fat, do I? She asked Lila and me. Claire has never been fat, probably never will be, and even if she were, she'd still be the most beautiful woman I've ever met in real life. She's also the nicest person I've ever met in real life, so I don't hold it against her. Stop asking questions like that, Lila admonished the bride. Your fat phobia is making the rest of us feel bad. Claire's face crumpled. Leave her alone, Lila, I said. The bride is allowed to cry on her wedding day, but it's supposed to be tears of happiness. You know Logan is here, said Claire, mostly just to change the subject. I think. Logan? I knew exactly which Logan Claire meant, but my pride wouldn't allow me to admit I'd been doing nothing for days, but half hoping, half fearing he'd show up to his brother's wedding. It would be very odd if he didn't. Ever since I'd met Logan at the Hungry Bunny on Valentine's Day, I'd regretted skipping out on our dinner date. You know very well she's talking about James's brother Logan, said Lila. I can't believe you stood him up like that. Missing our date had been unavoidable, but even so, 6 months later, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd missed out on something amazing. I couldn't stop thinking about Logan, although I wouldn't have admitted it to anyone for all the money in the world. I'd snuck peeks at Logan's social media updates whenever Claire left her phone unattended ever since she'd mentioned offhand that she'd friend him. I'm not saying I'm proud of that, although the way Claire made a big show of leaving her phone where I could get at it, I think she may have been enabling my cyberstalking. I wasn't proud of what I'd done, but I took strange comfort in knowing that Logan wasn't in a serious relationship with anyone, at least not anyone he'd seen fit to reveal to the world on social media. You know I had no choice but to miss dinner with Logan, I insisted. And after that, I was too embarrassed to. We know, said Lila. I paired you up with him, Claire told me. Even though I was officially a bridesmaid, I'd missed the rehearsal, and nobody had bothered to fill me in. I couldn't decide if that had been deliberate or an oversight. Up until that moment, Lila's primary concern, in her capacity of maid of honor, seemed to have been getting the zipper of my ghastly lime green satin sheath dress zipped. I was concerned about bursting out the seams. I'd also missed out on the fitting, which would have revealed the problem considerably sooner. I tried to console myself with the thought that at least if I did rip out the back seam, the enormous bow in the back would probably prevent any humiliating exposure of my sensible compression undergarment, borrowed from Lila, which was the only reason she'd been able to get the zipper up in the first place. By the time Claire's wedding coordinator stuck her head in the door and told us it was showtime for the bridal party, I had almost settled on what I'd say to Logan when I saw him. I'd be warm, but breezy. I'd apologize, with the truth, for standing him up, and then I'd move on to small talk. I'd harbor no expectations that he was still interested. Over the past months, I'd been itching to ask Claire what Logan had been up to. Was he really not seeing anyone? Was Logan mad at me? Did he still remember me at all? Claire wanted to tell me without me even having asked, but the few times she'd tried to bring up the subject, I'd shut her down. I was too embarrassed to admit that rarely did a day go by that I didn't think of Logan, despite my best efforts not to. I tried not to think of him when I was brushing my teeth in the morning. Logan had great teeth. I tried not to think of him as I folded and refolded the same wretched shirts at my miserable job at the mall. Logan had been wearing a blue button-down when I met him. I found myself seeing blue button-downs everywhere. On my way home from the bus stop, I had to pass the Hungry Bunny, but instead of going inside, I'd usually cross to the other side of the street. A couple of times, I made it all the way to the front door of the soda fountain, but I could never bring myself to go inside. That's how pathetic I am. As it turned out, when I finally got the chance to speak to Logan, I was not warm. I was not breezy. I did not apologize. I did, however, tell the truth. As soon as I saw Logan standing there in the foyer of the chapel, looking ridiculously handsome in a black tux, I walked straight up to him and said, "You probably ought to know I had the world's worst case of food poisoning." The only thing that could have made that statement any more awkward would have been telling Logan that the night of our missed date, I'd spent 7 hours straight in the bathroom. I left out the details, which proved I had some vestigial trace of discretion and a little latent dignity. That was a small comfort. My announcement that I'd suffered from the world's worst case of food poisoning took Logan so much by surprise that, for a full minute, he just stared at me. Then he started laughing. He laughed so hard that the wedding coordinator came over and shushed him. Something about how sound carried in these old stone buildings, and an admonition about stealing the mother of the bride's thunder. By the time Logan had gotten himself back under control, Lila and Bradley were already halfway to the altar. The poor beleaguered wedding coordinator motioned frantically to us to pull it together and follow Lila and Bradley. "Why are you laughing?" I hissed as we stepped through the back doors of the chapel and started down the aisle doing that ridiculous one step forward with the right foot, bring the left foot up to meet it, rinse and repeat shenanigans they make you do. I think it's so the walk down the aisle will last long enough to let everyone get a good long look at the wedding party and, in my case, comment on how the dresses make the bridesmaids look like overstuffed sausages left to languish in the back of the refrigerator and turn green with mold. "Is it the dress?" I asked. I know I looked ridiculous. "I'm not laughing," Logan insisted. "I'm smiling broadly." "You're smiling too broadly." "Maybe I'm just happy to see you?" "Are you that happy to see me?" "I am." I looked over at his face just before we parted ways in front to go to our gender-segregated lineups flanking the altar. He looked like he meant what he said. I tried not to look at him across the heads of the happy couple, but I didn't quite succeed. Every time I looked over at him, he was looking back at me with an expression that almost made me forget that I was standing up in front of 200 people in a dress that made me look like a spoiled salami. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I think it was partly the dress, but the other part was definitely Logan. Later on, at the reception, Logan came to find me. I had propped myself against the wall. There was no way I could sit down, not without splitting the dress from the small of my back to the hideous bow caboose. "Why aren't you eating?" Logan handed me a glass of seltzer and cranberry with a slice of lemon in it. Did he remember that's how I like my seltzer? He must have. "Are you kidding me? I can barely breathe as it is." "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you," Logan said abruptly. I had taken a sip of the seltzer and cranberry. I may have spit it out when Logan said that. I may have dribbled it all down the front of my hideous lime green dress. I had thought I couldn't possibly become less visually appealing than I already was. Apparently, I was wrong. "I'll get you a towel," said Logan, "if I can find one. While you're at it, perhaps you could see where I left my dignity." Logan laughed when I said that, but he took off his jacket and draped it over my shoulders, hiding my sausage-like cranberry-dribbled hideousness. "I meant it, you know," said Logan. "Meant what?" "That I can't stop thinking about you." I couldn't stop thinking about him either, but I was wary. I'd been obsessing about Logan for too long. Number one, after all that fantasizing, reality would never measure up. Number two, I wasn't at all sure he was as into me as I was into him. What if he was just looking for some cliché get-all hotsy-totsy with a bridesmaid thing? I'm not a hotsy-totsy on short notice kind of girl, and even if I was, I would be wary of risking my heart on someone I'd been thinking about every day for the past 122 days. Not that I'd been counting. I'm not really looking for. Neither am I. I watched Logan's back as he walked away. What wasn't he looking for? When he returned with the towel, he said, "I want to start over from the very beginning." He stuck out his hand. Hi, I'm Logan. Will you have dinner with me tomorrow evening? Hi, I'm Ami, and I'd be delighted. I may have attempted a sort of curtsy-like maneuver, which may or may not have split my sausage casing. It didn't matter. I was enveloped in a jacket that smelled deliciously like Logan. After that, I may or may not have kissed a certain handsome soda jerk under the entirely inadequate cover of an imitation potted palm at the edge of the dance floor. Hopefully, nobody noticed. Around about the same time, I did hear the bride and groom wolf whistling. I'm sure it had absolutely nothing to do with Logan and me and what we were getting up to behind the fake flora. Valentine's Day 2020. Cupid so loves us, said Claire as she put the finishing touches on Lila's hair. We were in a tiny room at the back of the church. Lila had decided to skip the veil. She was skipping the white dress, too. Been there. Done that, was her explanation. That Valentine's Day 2 years ago when Bradley had crashed our pity party at the Hungry Bunny, unbeknownst to Claire and me, Lila and Bradley had struck a deal. They'd give it another go. If they were still together in precisely 24 months, which meant Valentine's Day 2020, they'd get married again. It might be a little cliché, a Valentine's Day wedding, but no one cared. Everyone who loved Lila or Bradley even a little bit was pleased that those two, so obviously meant for each other, were finally making it official. Again. Cupid may love you and Lila, I said to Claire, but I'm not so sure how much Cupid loves me. Lila and Bradley were sickeningly happy together. Ditto James and Claire. Claire was also 3 months pregnant. Not that I was jealous of that, or anything. I was definitely not ready for motherhood yet. I was, however, ready to be a bride. Logan and I had been together for over a year now, and no matter how many hints I dropped, there wasn't a peep in his direction about us making it official. Don't get me wrong, I loved Logan like a house on fire, and I was pretty sure he felt the same way about me, it's just that I'd have liked to look down at my left hand and see a ring on my finger. It's not like I wanted to rush into anything, but I thought a year and a half was long enough to know for sure if somebody is the one. The strange thing was that Logan wasn't anti-marriage. In fact, whenever I brought it up, he was always very positive about getting married, at some unspecified point in the future, and I definitely to me. You could always propose to him, Lila said. There's no reason why not, Claire chimed in. Don't think I haven't considered it. I had, for about 3 minutes. Then I'd abandoned the idea. I have nothing against female empowerment and taking charge of one's own destiny and all that, it was just that it would be too shameless, after all the hints I'd been dropping lately. Oh, well. I shouldn't complain. Logan and I are happy just as we are. I shouldn't ruin it by wanting something more. Go ahead, said Lila. Keep telling yourself that. Since she and Bradley have gotten back together, Lila's gotten pretty smug. Sometimes, I think I liked her better when she was a grouchy love-averse cynic. Time to get going, Claire said. We don't want Bradley to worry that you've changed your mind. There's no danger of me changing my mind, Lila said. Believe me. I know exactly what I'm getting into. Maybe that's the cure for pre-wedding jitters? Marry someone you've been married to before. If Lila had been having bridesmaids or a maid of honor, Claire and I would have been wearing hideous matching dresses, but she wasn't having any of that. Lila wasn't even doing the walk down an aisle thing. She and Bradley were walking in at the same time. He was waiting in the tiny vestibule. I thought that was kind of lacking in the symbolism that the occasion called for, but Lila didn't. Think of this more as a renewal of vows, she suggested. That helped. A little. There were very few guests. Lila and Bradley could have had thousands of guests, some of whom would have undoubtedly come just to see Bradley. He's famous enough now to have collected a few rather rabid fans, so Lila and Bradley had decided on a very small ceremony, only family and their very closest friends. The thing Lila seemed most worried about was a paparazzo getting in somehow and unauthorized photos being leaked to the press. I guess that's one of the perils of remarrying someone famous. There's always the danger of a tabloid running photos of your first and second wedding side by side accompanied by uncharitable comments about how ungracefully you've aged in the intervening years. Lila had a point. I wouldn't want that happening to me either, not that Lila had anything to worry about. She looked great. I thought she looked even better than when she'd married Bradley the first time. Claire and I slipped into the sanctuary. Logan and James were sitting in the front row. Logan smiled at me as I sat down beside him. He took my hand. "Call me a hopeless romantic," he whispered, but I couldn't be happier for these two. Hopeless romantic? I came perilously close to snorting in derision, but the guitarist up front had started to play the acoustic rock ballad that was standing in for the wedding march, so I restrained myself. It was a beautiful ceremony. I didn't even have to be a hopeless romantic to see that. Lila cried a little. I heard Logan sniffing. When I looked over, there was an actual tear running down his cheek. I couldn't believe it. Why couldn't Logan channel some of that soppy sentimentalism into proposing to me? I wanted to kick him in the shin, but I stifled the urge. After the ceremony, we went to Bradley's enormous house, Lila and Bradley's enormous house, for dinner and dancing. They'd moved all the furniture out of the lower story to make room for tables and a dance floor. There were lots more people there than had been at the ceremony, so many that I lost track of Logan once we'd made it through the buffet line. I waited around for him for a few minutes, but when I couldn't spot him, I went and sat down next to Claire. "I've just about had it with Logan," I said. Claire looked startled. And slightly alarmed. "What do you mean?" "He was crying during the ceremony. Real tears." "What's so terrible about that?" Claire asked. She was staring around like she was looking for someone. That's totally unlike her. She usually gives the person she's talking to her complete and undivided attention. There's nothing so terrible about it. I like that Logan is sensitive. I just wish he'd be more sensitive about me. What did he do that was so insensitive? Claire asked. She was craning her neck now. It's more what he didn't do. Whenever I bring up the subject of long-term commitment, he just kind of hems and haws. I'm sure Claire wasn't paying any attention to what I was saying, at least, she didn't look like she was. Usually, she's super sympathetic. An unsympathetic Claire was the last straw. "I'm going home," I said. "You can't do that," Claire protested. She grabbed my arm and held onto it as if I was going to slip away immediately. "Why not?" Claire was still looking frantically around. It entered my mind that years of working with mental patients might have finally taken their toll, and she was going quietly crackers. "They haven't cut the cake." "You can't leave until they cut the cake." "There isn't any cake," I said. "Everything's already out on the dessert table. You know Lila hates cake. They didn't even have a cake at their first wedding. You won't be here to throw rice when they go away." "Do people still do rice?" "I thought it was bad for the birds. Swells up in their stomachs or something. You know what I mean. You have to stay and send Lila and Bradley off." "There isn't going to be any sending them off. This is Lila and Bradley's house. They both have to be back at work first thing tomorrow. The rest of us are the ones who are leaving." Claire was looking positively frantic. She tightened her grip on my arm. "I'm feeling terribly sick," she said. She didn't look sick, but you can hardly question a pregnant woman who claims she's feeling sick. "Can you get me a glass of water?" she pleaded. "Please." I picked up her water glass from off the table. "Here," I said. She took a sip and made what sounded suspiciously like fake retching sounds. "Water isn't working. I think there's some ginger ale at the bar." I went to the bar and got some ginger ale. I still hadn't spotted Logan. If he'd been a different sort of man, I'd have been afraid he was off in some corner with another woman, but he's not that sort of man, at least I'd never thought so up until now. I was pretty sure he was just deliberately avoiding me, and I couldn't figure out why. We hadn't been fighting. I came back and handed Claire the ginger ale. She took several sips. "Feeling better?" "A little." James came up to the table. "Oh, good," I said. "You're here." Claire's feeling sick, but you can take care of her now. I'm going home. If you see Logan. No. James said. You can't go home. James, too? Why was my presence suddenly so indispensable? My imagination went into overdrive. I told the voices in my head to shut up and took a swig of Claire's ginger ale before I stood up. I think my water just broke. Claire said. She was clearly under the impression I was about to bolt. Claire was barely even showing yet. Did she think I had absolutely no knowledge of human reproduction? Really? I said. That's the best you've got? You're 3 months pregnant and your water just broke? Just sit down, Ami, said James. You won't be sorry you stayed. I promise. So I sat down. I ate my way through my first plate and went back for a second. Stress makes some people lose their appetites. Not me. If I could only be so lucky. Still no Logan, and now James had disappeared again, too. People were already out on the dance floor. I watched them as I scarfed down my second plate. Then, as I was paying a visit to the dessert table, the dance floor mysteriously cleared. I picked out a dish of flan and a piece of strawberry something or other and headed back to Claire. 2 desserts might seem slightly piggish, but I didn't care. It wasn't like I was going to have to fit into a wedding dress anytime soon or anything. Oh, good, said Claire. You're back. Logan hasn't turned up yet, has he? Just be quiet and eat your flan, Claire ordered. It was very unlike her to order anyone to do anything, so I sat down, shut up, and took my first bite. During my third bite, the lights dimmed, and a spotlight shone on the middle of the dance floor. I looked over at Claire. She refused to look at me, but she was grinning like a maniac. The spotlight traveled over to the staircase leading to the second story, and there, standing at the top of the stairs, were 3 men dressed as Kenny and 2 of his cats. I looked over at Claire again. She was still grinning from ear to ear, and she still refused to meet my eye. Then the strains of Forever Love came wafting out of the speakers. No way. Kenny and his cats danced their way to the center of the dance floor, where they pulled off some pretty impressive synchronized dance moves. Is that who I think it is? I asked Claire. She tried to look all innocent. Who do you think it is? Kenny looked an awful lot like Logan, and the cats bore striking resemblances to James and Bradley. The song and dance was winding down, and I realized that Kenny was making his way over to our table. The spotlight followed him. When he reached the table, he stopped in front of me. It was definitely Logan. Then Kenny/Logan got down on one knee. This is it. This is actually it. He's finally going to propose. I was suddenly plagued with a last-minute niggling doubt. What if this is all some big joke? What if, but I didn't get in any more paranoid what-ifs. Logan had a ring box out. He was taking my hand. Ami Evers, he said, will you marry me? I think I almost fell out of my chair because Claire reached over to hold me up. I said, yes, of course, and Logan pulled me to my feet. Then he was kissing me, and I was kissing him back. Through the buzzing in my ears, I realized everyone was whistling and applauding. Pretty quickly, though, everybody turned their attention back to whatever they'd been doing before the unexpected entrance of Kenny and the cool cats and left us alone. Everybody except Claire and Lila and their significant others still dressed as cats. You knew. I said. You all knew. We didn't, Claire said. I mean, Lila and I didn't. Not until after the ceremony, anyway. Bradley and James had. Obviously. I think Logan was afraid we dropped too many hints, said Lila. Logan didn't bother to contradict her. But the song, I said. I can't believe Logan remembered about the song. I hadn't mentioned it once since Valentine's Day 2 years ago, the night Logan and I first met at the Hungry Bunny. Being a lifelong fan of Kenny and the Cool Cats is not something I like to admit to on a regular basis. How could I not remember that song? Logan said. You told me it was your favorite on the night we met. I know. But that was 2 years ago. I remember everything about that night. You were wearing a yellow sweater, a little frayed out at the cuffs. You paid your bill with $100 you were keeping in your shoe. That had been my last $100, literally, my bank account didn't have enough to cover our ice cream. I keep my reserve cash in my shoe. Don't ask. I'd resorted to using my emergency stash because I hadn't been able to bring myself to interrupt either Lila or Claire for their share of the bill. As things had turned out, that was the most momentous evening of any of our lives. It had been money well spent, even though I'd had to subsist on store-brand cereal and instant noodles until my next paycheck. That evening, you smelled like vanilla and roses, Logan continued. He claimed to be a hopeless romantic. Maybe he was telling the truth. But when did you decide to propose? I couldn't help asking. I should have waited to ask that question until when our nosy loved ones weren't listening, but I had to know. About 6 months ago. I can back him up on that, said Bradley. James and I went with him to pick out the ring. You bought a ring 6 months ago. I was too happy to get mad, but stringing me along for 6 months without giving me a shred of hope to cling to? Really? I picked out the ring 6 months ago, said Logan. But I just finished paying for it last week. I looked down at the ring on my finger. It was a beautiful ring, much nicer than a soda jerk could easily afford. I wondered what he'd had to give up to save enough to pay for it. All my irritation evaporated. I'm sorry, I said. For what? Logan asked. For. I wasn't sure how to put into words what I was sorry for. I don't blame you for being frustrated, Logan said. You couldn't have made it any plainer that you wanted me to propose. I'll say she couldn't have, Lila said. It's just that I wanted it to be a surprise, said Logan. I wanted my proposal to be memorable. Well, you certainly succeeded. There was a slow song playing, and Logan and I headed out onto the dance floor for our first dance as an engaged couple. As we swayed to the music while indulging in shameless public displays of affection, I realized that we turned into one of those couples I used to hate. That's okay. Hate me if you must. I know Cupid doesn't. I'm 100% sure of that now. And